It's hard to believe that the PlayStation 5 is now the standard as a current gen system. For a while, games were still released on the PS4, but with more exclusives only coming to PS5 like Spider-Man 2 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, it's finally time to move on. There's already a good selection of games for the console that cover several genres. However, when it comes to tough games that require equal parts patience, talent, and tenacity, PlayStation has some of the most tried and true entries in recent gaming history. The PlayStation 5, like virtually all other consoles, has some incredibly difficulty games, but there is one element that makes PlayStation stand out. Two Soulsborne titles are exclusive to the platform, making PlayStation the preferred console for playing from Software's games. There's a plethora of wildly hard third party titles as well, and with so much material, this list was ripe for further expansion. Number 15, Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2. No matter if you're playing Ninja Gaiden 2 on Xbox 360 or Sigma 2 on PlayStation, you will have a tough time. Interestingly, they're difficult in different ways. Vanilla NJ2 has brutal encounters with a vast amount of enemies, and damage is high, while Sigma 2 has the total enemies cut down a peg. Unfortunately, the damage has significantly increased, especially with no joke on Master Ninja. Most Grabsia will kill you in one hit, even with a maxed out health bar. That's just cheap. And to add insult to injury, there's the co op missions. Some of these missions are the hardest tasks in the entire franchise, with or without a co op partner. Number 14, Trials Rising. One of the most underrated gaming series of all time has to be Trials. Its simplicity but infinite depth is pure genius. However, it can be rough for a newcomer. Trials Rising thankfully has some great beginner learning tools in the University of Trials that will help you a lot, but it still takes time to get good. Even for veterans, Rising can be difficult to get used to because the bikes handle differently from Trials Fusion. It's a tough game on its own, but if you want to beat everything, including the ninja tracks, Rising's probably the hardest title on the system. To put things in perspective, only around 250 people have completed Black Belt, the hardest track in the game. You have to be an elite level player to finish them all. Number 13, Mortal Shell Souls like games are known and praised for their difficulty, but it can be tricky knowing where to start with the challenging subgenre. A solid suggestion would be Mortal Shell. Its gameplay, atmosphere, and level design are straight out of the Dark Souls playbook, but it has enough mechanics to stand up to the best in the subgenre. Mortal Shell's defensive mechanics is where Souls veterans will struggle. Instead of a shield, your character uses a hardening mechanic. It effectively turns your character into stone to deflect attacks. Getting the timing down can take some getting used to, but rewarding when it all starts to click. This Souls clone provides a worthy challenge for fans, and if you own a PS5, you will benefit from haptic feedback, enhanced visuals, and a smooth premiere. Mr. Gum, number 12, Steel Rising. The developer Spiders has become known for making good games that take inspiration from other sources. The well received RPG Greedfall plays and feels like a Dragon Age game, and now the studio has created a Souls like in Steel Rising. Like Greedfall, Steel Rising has enough there to make it a good game in its own right. Unlike most Souls-like games, Steel Rising caters to beginners with its assist mode features. While this makes it more accessible for a beginner new to the genre, it would be a mistake to underestimate the challenge that waits. Timing your attacks takes practice and is vital to success. Your enemies are super aggressive, so playing defensively with dodges is pacier than Dark Souls. Always staying on the move and being aware of attack patterns will take several tries. Number 11, Neo Next to Souls. The Neo series from Team Ninja is arguably the most successful Souls-like. It combines elements from Ninja Gaiden and Dark Souls to create a brutally challenging title with a grind as satisfying to play. The combat system is faster and requires a lot of skill and timing from you to master its combat. The fluid action and speed make it one of the best sword fighting games on the PS4 and PS5. However, even though the protagonist William is fast, so are his enemies. Even the lowest can catch you off guard and kill you with a single blow. Shrines that act like Dark Souls bonfires are few and far between, so the unforgiving nature of Neo can put you back significantly if a boss battle has the better of you. Number 10, Elden Ring. There was a time when the niche Soulspoon series was deemed an acquired taste, but now, with Elden Ring's huge success on PlayStation, the games have experienced a resurgence. Although Elden Ring is not impossible by most gaming standards, it is punishing for several reasons. First, it's near impossible to pause the game. There are naturally save points, albeit very spread out, which means if you quit before getting to the next save, you have to start that section over. Secondly, there is no hand holding in Elden Ring, and the combat system takes time to open up. There are so many styles and skills to get to grips with that you will spend hours finding a style that suits you. Sure, Elden Ring's easier than other From Software titles, but if you start with it, that won't matter much. Number 9, Returnal. For years, fans have been clamoring for a more challenging sci fi survival game in the vein of space horror titles like Dead Space or Alien Isolation. Needless to say, there are games in that genre to pick from, but not too many, especially near the beginning of the PlayStation 5's launch. So, Returnal was a game that caught the eye of many fans. You play as Celine, a space pilot who, while on a solo mission, crash lands on the planet Atropos and has to fare with its very inhospitable forces. It is equal parts survival, sci fi horror, and third person roguelike, so suffice it to say, it is a challenge. However, the lack of a traditional save mechanic meant that Returnal was among one of the least finished titles of 2021. Number 8, Devil May Cry 5. In what can only be described as a departure from the preceding Devil May Cry game, Devil May Cry 5 is a challenge far and wide. The game's normal difficulty mode is about what you'd expect, but the two higher levels, especially Dante Must Die, are crushing. At that point, the steep learning curve really comes into play, and you must learn all the ins and outs of the combat to succeed. With the ridiculously high damage output the enemies have, you can't mess around here. Many will likely drop the game at this point, but if you conquer every difficulty mode, that is a big accomplishment. Number 7, Demon Souls Remake, the From Software title that started it all. Demon Souls saw something of a resurgence as one of the PS5's original launch titles. The hit remake saw Blue Point Games acquired by PlayStation. However, maybe the years have made From Software more understanding, and thus this is where the developer has taken pity on newer beginners. As in games like Elden Ring and Bloodborne, you can leave tips and hints to help others avoid certain death, especially when it comes to more tricky parts. But more than that, if you find yourself vastly underleveled and under-equipped, you will quickly find that taking the time to level up your skills and arsenal will pay you back tenfold, making the endgame much more manageable. Number 6, Sifu. The indie martial arts hit Sifu has been regularly praised since its initial launch in February 2022. While the game does showcase martial arts influence derived from recent movies like The Raid, Old Boy, The Matrix, and the recent reboot of Mortal Kombat, it is challenging to master. Specifically from the second level and on, Sifu requires you to understand how to fight instead of just button mashing, commonplace for many beat 'em up games. And fortunately, you can utilize the environmental surroundings to your advantage. Alternatively, although the combat is uncompromising, the game only has 5 levels, assuming you micromanage your energy, stamina, and health meters and stay alive. Number 5, Nier 2. When considering difficult games, Nier 2 takes the cake. The advanced and aggressive enemy AI leaves little room for error. Yet what it lacks in ease of access, it makes up for in beauty and execution. Mastering the combat can be just as fulfilling as progressing in the 40-hour plus campaign. This is even more so when considering the variety of weapons you can choose, each with its unique pros and cons. Although said weapons will take their fair share of wear and tear along the path to defeating the bosses, awaiting at the end game with seemingly infinite health. Number 4, Hades. In 2018, Hades was at the top of many gaming publications' GOTY lists, and for good reason. The roguelike dungeon crawler game from Supergiant Games was so successful upon its initial launch on Nintendo Switch that it was later ported to most other platforms. Although there are technically two difficulty modes, God mode is substantially more worthwhile and rewarding than the other. With God mode, you can restart the majority of the game with a 2% strength increase and an overall 20% resistance to all enemy attacks. So over time, this ramps up. This enforces the idea that failure is in fact our greatest teacher, and in an age when many gaming fans are sick of being guided, Hades forces perseverance and learning from your mistakes. Number 3, Dead Cells. Dead Cells is a Castlevania-inspired roguelike platformer where you play as a reanimated prisoner within a castle full of secrets and enemies. It is common for beginners to feel overwhelmed, especially with its roguelike features, but you will keep much of what is earned item-wise. Despite all of this, a roguelike will always be challenging to a certain degree, and much of that comes from the mental game. When permanent death's a factor, you need to keep your nerves in check because a choke on a potential win will be devastating like no other. You must have both gamer skills and mental skills for these titles. Number 2, Bloodborne. Although it still has yet to be natively ported to the latest console from PlayStation, that hasn't stopped Bloodborne from being frequented on several best games ever made lists. However, it is a very hard title, and while fans have repeatedly begged From Software to change its formula and approach to difficulty in the series, the studio stuck to its guns. Aside from the trademark gothic Victorian aesthetic that Bloodborne is known for, the story is equal parts creepy. You play the role of the hunter who frequents the streets of fictional Yarnum, fighting off its diseased inhabitants. As a hunter, you encounter many ferocious creatures straight out of H.R. Gage's Necronomicon. The rest are just the usual buyer beware that comes with From Software games. Number 1, Cuphead. Originally an Xbox exclusive, Cuphead is now available on multiple platforms and is still highly regarded by fans. The platformer is praised for perfectly embodying the energy of 1930 S carefree cartoons it emulates, while taking multiple casualties with its very frustrating gameplay. While the fast moving run and gun formula should not be underestimated, the real frustration comes from the tough boss battles, the hardest being the fight with Dr. Carl's robot. But the most common complaint is related to Cuphead's level design, which utilizes a plethora of enemies in small, busy areas.